13-year-old girl was kicked out of her home because she was pregnant, and years later she returned, shocking everyone. Sophia's voice rang out in the already stuffy and tense house. "Hello, people. Please enjoy these relaxing moments while watching. Do you have anything to say?" No one answered. There was only the sound of Sophia's rapid breathing and the freezing atmosphere. The 13-year-old girl stood cowering, her small shoulders trembling under invisible pressure. Her hands tightened on the hem of her shirt, her head bowed low, not daring to look up. Her eyes were wide open, filled with fear as she looked ahead, where her parents were standing, like judges waiting for the verdict. Isabella, her mother, was the first to break the silence. Her voice was sharp as a knife. "Don't you feel humiliated? A 13-year-old girl is pregnant? Do you know how much you have humiliated this family? What will people say about you? About us?" Isabella's words echoed throughout the room, like knives piercing Sophia's heart. The girl bit her lip so hard that it bled. She wanted to explain, wanted to justify, but her throat was tight. I didn't mean it." Her voice was trembling and weak, like a candle in the wind. Bam! Isabella slammed her hand down on the table, causing everything to vibrate. The glass of water on the table slid down and shattered on the floor. Sophia was startled. Her heart seemed to be strangled. "Not on purpose? Do you think this is simply unintentional? You have ruined this family's honor. You are a disgrace, a spoiled daughter." Louis, her father, has been silent up until now. But his eyes, those cold eyes, were like a sharp ice penetrating straight into Sophia's heart. Finally, he raised his voice, each word coming out like a fatal knife. "Leaving you here will only further disgrace this family. You have ruined everything. Leave and never come back. The verdict has been given." Sophia froze in place. Her mind was blank. Her ears were ringing. She looked at her father with pleading eyes, hoping to find even a glimmer of mercy, but all she received was a look of contempt. "No, please." Her voice cracked like a small bird whose feathers had been plucked. "Mom, I beg you." The girl rushed towards Isabella, holding her hand, but her hand was cold and hard as stone. Isabella jerked her hand away, her eyes unwavering. "Stop begging. Go away." Sophia's legs were soft. She stepped back, her body trembling. Everything around seemed to collapse. "I have nowhere to go. I don't know what to do." Her voice trailed off, almost to a helpless whisper. But Louis turned away, not bothering to look back. "That's your problem. Don't ever come back here again." She stood there, alone in the middle of the house that was once her home. But now, it has become a prison, and she is in exile. Isabella lifted her chin, her eyes as sharp as a blade that finally cut all ties. "You're just an embarrassment." And with that, the door slammed shut behind Sophia. No one chased. No one called her back. Darkness swallowed a 13-year-old girl, alone in the middle of a vast and cruel world. Rain poured down on the city like a never-ending curse. The long and dark alleys, where the rare light from the flickering street lamps seemed to be about to go out, imprinted Sophia's heavy footsteps. The 13-year-old girl walked on the cold tile floor, the cold wind biting her thin body. Everything around seems no longer important. No one called her name. No one waited for her. The home, the place that once protected her, has now closed its doors to her forever. Sophia tightened her thin shirt to her body, her lifeless eyes looking into endless space. She doesn't cry anymore. Tears dried up that day, the day her mother pushed her out the door with eyes full of hatred, when that woman knew that her little daughter was carrying a tiny life inside her. There is no understanding, no comforting embrace. There were only angry insults and absolute disgust. "Get out of my house! You are no longer my daughter." That shout still echoed in Sophia's head, like a knife cutting into her young mind. When the door slammed shut in her face, she knew there was no turning back. There is nowhere to return. There's no one to hold on to. She kept walking, not knowing where to go. With each step she stepped on the wet pavement, it was as if she was stepping on her own pain. The cold permeated every fiber of my body, but it was still not as cold as the loneliness that was gnawing at my soul. No one asked if she was okay. No one cared where she went. She is just an invisible child in the midst of a cruel life. It was late at night. Sophia curled up in the corner of a closed market, her arms wrapped around her stomach in a protective instinct. The wind whistled, rushing through the tattered tarpaulins, making her tremble every time. She closed her eyes, trying to fall asleep, but the horrifying images of the past still appeared as clearly as scars that could not fade. She remembers that day, the fateful day that took everything away. Late one afternoon, sunlight shined through the trees, creating dappled light on the familiar village road. Sophia is still an innocent little girl who has never known the evil things in this world. She still believes in fairy tales, believes that everyone has a warm heart, but she was wrong. The neighbor, the man she still called Uncle, who always smiled and waved every time she passed by, called her into the house with a sweet tone. "Sophia, come here, I have something really cool for you to see." The girl did not suspect. She trusted, stepped in, and then everything crumbled. Pain pierced my body. Fear gripped my soul. She wanted to run, wanted to scream, but her voice was muffled in her throat. His eyes were cold, empty, without any humanity. When it all ended, Sophia was left with an immense void in her heart, a wound that could not be healed. She didn't tell anyone. She was scared. She blamed herself, until the day her body changed, until her small belly began to protrude as a cruel testament to what had happened. She thought her mother would understand. She thought that if she cried, if she told the truth, her mother would hug her and tell her that everything would be okay. But instead, she just looked at her with eyes filled with contempt, as if she were the dirtiest thing she had ever seen. "You've humiliated me, Sophia." Every word is like a knife stabbing into the heart. She begged, she cried, but nothing changed. Her mother chose to believe that she was a pervert, instead of believing that she was a victim. And then, the door closed. Sophia was pushed out into the outside world, where she had no refuge, no one to love, no one to protect. She must be strong. She knew that if she collapsed, the baby in her womb would not survive. Day after day, she searched for food from trash bins behind restaurants. Some days, she is lucky to find some old bread. Other days, she can only drink water to satisfy her hunger. She began to learn how to avoid the judgmental eyes and malicious whispers of passers-by. She learned to sleep in the dark without fear. But there were nights when she clutched her stomach. She wondered, can I continue living like this? She once thought about death, once stood on a high bridge, looking down at the dark water below. If you jump down, all the pain will end. She won't have to suffer anymore. But then, a light thump from inside her stomach startled her. She was no longer alone. She must live, not for yourself, but for the innocent baby in your womb. The sky was gray. The clouds were heavy, as if about to pour down an endless rain. The street was wet from the rain the day before, small puddles of water reflecting the weak streetlights in the night. In that cold scene, Sophia trudged with heavy steps, her bare feet bleeding from walking for many days. His thin hands hugged his belly tightly, trying to shield the little creature growing inside his body. Many days have passed since she was pushed out onto the street, since the only door she once called home closed before her eyes. She didn't know how long she had been wandering, nor did she know where she was going. She just walked, letting the cold wind cut into her skin, letting the hunger twist in her stomach. The eyes of passers-by passed by her, some full of pity, some indifference, some with a bit of contempt. But no one stopped. No one asked her if she was okay. No one reached out to pull her out of this quagmire of despair. Life is cruel to a 13-year-old, but she seems to have gotten used to it. Because she knows in this world, no one truly loves her. Only when her legs could no longer move forward did she stop next to an old brick wall, cowering in the middle of a dark corner of a small alley. The rain fell again, cold drops of water seeping through the thin layer of clothing. She shivered, tightening her arms around her body in a desperate attempt to find some warmth. Another day passed, and she still had nowhere to go. Amidst the bone-chilling cold, amidst the darkness and desperate loneliness, a deep voice rang in her ears. "Little girl, you can't sit here forever. It's very cold." She was startled and raised her head. In front of her was an older woman. Her hair was silver, but her eyes still shone with gentle warmth. She had a thick wool scarf wrapped around her shoulders. Her hands were calloused from hard work, but her voice was strangely gentle. Sophia didn't respond, just instinctively backed away, her eyes wary. She was so used to being hurt that she no longer dared to believe in anyone's kindness. But the woman did not leave, nor did she seem annoyed by her silence. She just gently took off the scarf from her shoulders and draped it over her trembling shoulders. "I'm Margaret," she said, her voice as deep as a small fire in the cold winter. "If you don't have anywhere to go, I have a small bakery right around here. I can give you a meal and a place to rest." A meal. For the first time after many days of wandering, Sophia felt she needed something more than fear. She needed a meal, needed some warmth, even if just for a moment. She nodded slightly, almost not believing her own decision. Margaret smiled, a gentle smile that carried no pity or scrutiny. She held out her hand, waiting. A moment passed. Then Sophia tremblingly put her small hand into her calloused one. That hand was so warm. For the first time in a long time, she felt the warmth of another human being. Margaret took her to her small bakery, a simple but cozy place, with the scent of freshly baked bread spreading throughout the room. It was a small space but filled with peace, a place that Sophia had never been in her life. Margaret did not ask anything about her past, did not probe or force her to tell stories. She just gave her a bowl of hot soup, told her to sit down next to the fireplace, and let her eat in silence. The bowl of soup was simple, but for Sophia, it was the most delicious thing she had ever eaten. The heat spread in every corner of her body, dispelling the cold that had clung to her for many days. After eating, Margaret gave her a set of clean clothes and a small bed in the room behind the bakery. "You can stay here if you want," she said, her eyes sincere. "I don't have much, but at least you'll have a roof over your head." Sophia looked at her, her little heart suddenly filled with emotions that she could not name. She was so used to being chased away and hated that she didn't dare believe that there was still someone willing to help her without any reason at all. But Margaret asked for nothing. She simply opened her arms to receive her, like a fairy in the fairy tale she believed in when she was a child. The next days passed. Sophia gradually got used to the rhythm of life in the small bakery. During the day, she helps Margaret make cakes, learns how to knead dough, and learns how to make each loaf of bread turn golden and perfect in the oven. In the evening, she sat by the fireplace, listening to Margaret's stories about her youth, about the good things in the world that Sophia had never thought of. The wound in her heart did not heal immediately, but with each passing day, it began to hurt less. Under Margaret's protection, Sophia began to feel that she was no longer alone. Margaret couldn't replace the family she lost, but she gave her something even more precious, a chance to believe in the goodness of people. Every morning, when the sunlight streams through the glass window, when the scent of freshly baked bread blends into the air, Sophia feels like she is gradually resurrected from the ashes of the past. She was no longer the helpless girl standing in the rain, no longer the child pushed out onto the street with a broken heart. She is someone who is learning to move on, and that for her is the greatest miracle. The morning sky still retained a bit of the cold dew from last night. The pale sunlight filtered through the glass windows of the bakery, drawing faint streaks of light on the old wooden table. The aroma of freshly baked bread spreads throughout the small space, blending with the scent of hot coffee, creating a strangely warm and peaceful feeling. But with Sophia, everything is still strange. She stood quietly in the corner of the kitchen, her small hands shaking as she held the dough knife, her eyes still not used to the hustle and bustle of this place. She knew that she was lucky to find a place to take refuge, a place that did not push her out onto the street with disgusted eyes or harsh scoldings. But deep inside, she still could not erase the hurt that had been engraved on her soul. Every time she thinks about the past, she feels like she is sinking into a bottomless abyss, where darkness surrounds her, where old scars have never truly healed. But no matter what, she still has to move on. Because there was no other choice. because if she stopped, she would forever be stuck in that pain. Margaret gave her a chance she never thought she would have. From the moment she stepped into this bakery, she told herself that she would do everything to not disappoint the woman who reached out to help her when the whole world turned its back. She wanted to prove that she was worthy of it, that she was more than just a pitiful person wandering the streets, not just an outcast child with a growing belly. But everything is not easy. From the first days, she understood that work in the bakery was not as simple as she thought. The golden loaves of bread she saw in the glass cabinet did not appear out of nowhere. They are the result of hours of continuous work, from kneading the dough, proofing it, shaping it, until putting it in the oven at the exact time and temperature. Sophia knew nothing about any of that. Her hands were clumsy, her little fingers fumbling as she tried to follow Margaret's instructions. She learned how to knead dough, but many times the dough was too dry or too mushy. She learned how to roll out the dough, but the cake had a distorted shape. She learned how to put the cake in the oven, but either baked it too long, causing it to burn, or took it out too early, causing it to not be fully cooked. Each time she looked down, feeling useless. But Margaret did not scold her. She just gently corrected each mistake, patiently teaching her little by little. "No one is good from the start. You need time," she said, her voice calm and warm. Those words helped Sophia feel lighter, but could not erase the fear in her heart. She was afraid she would ruin everything, afraid that one day Margaret would realize that she wasn't worth helping. So, she tried harder, spent more time in the kitchen, repeating each operation over and over until she got used to it. She wakes up earlier than everyone else and stays up later to practice. Her hands began to get calloused from kneading the dough too much. Her wrists ached from the constant rolling of the dough, but she did not complain. She knows this is her only chance to rebuild her life, and she will not let it pass in vain. But no matter how much Sophia tried, she still couldn't change the eyes of the people around her. Since she appeared in the bakery, whispers began to rise. At first, everyone just looked at her with curiosity, but gradually, that curiosity turned into suspicion, then into prejudice. Where did this girl come from? Mistress is so kind, but is it worth it? A pregnant child working in a bakery? Does no one find this strange? Those words, even though they weren't said directly to her, she heard them all. They were like knives cutting into her already damaged self-esteem. She was so used to people's contempt, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt her. Not only the employees in the bakery, even the customers are not all willing to accept her. There are days when she is cleaning the cake counter or putting cakes in paper bags. Some customers will stare at her, sometimes with eyes of concern, sometimes with obvious disdain. Someone even turned to Margaret and asked, "Who is this girl? Are you sure someone like that should work here?" Margaret didn't answer those questions. She just continued her work, but Sophia knew she heard, and that made her feel guilty. She didn't want to be a burden to Margaret. She didn't want to be the reason the bakery lost customers. She had thought about leaving, but where could she go? A child without a family, without a place to live, with a life growing every day in her belly. She had nowhere else to go. Therefore, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how discriminated against, she must stay. She learned to ignore gossip, learned to work harder to prove that she was not a useless person. She tried twice or thrice as hard as others, so that no one could say that she was just taking advantage of Margaret. Those days of hard work were not without results. Gradually, she became more proficient at her work. The cakes she makes are no longer distorted. The crust is crispy. The filling is soft and fragrant. She began to be able to decorate small cakes more skillfully by herself, and her strokes with fresh cream became more delicate and soulful. And then, for the first time, a customer smiled while holding a cake that she herself made. "This cake is delicious," the person said, his voice full of satisfaction. Just a simple sentence, but it touched Sophia so much that she almost burst into tears. She realized that maybe she couldn't change everyone's mind, but she could change the way she saw herself. She is no longer the little girl wandering around in the rainy night, no longer the child abandoned by her own family. She is an apprentice baker. She is a person trying to rebuild her life. And although the road ahead is still full of difficulties, she knows that she will not give up. Because, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a goal to work towards. And that is the biggest motivation for her to keep going. Every morning, Sophia woke up to the scent of flour and sugar melting in the air, a warm scent she never thought she would have the chance to feel. From the moment she set foot in Margaret's bakery, she felt like she had found a place to cling to in this harsh world. Margaret not only gave her a roof and a warm bed, but also gave her a job, something that society out there refused to give her even a small chance. Even though she has no experience, Sophia always tries her best. At first, she only did simple tasks such as cleaning, washing dishes, and arranging ingredients. Gradually, under Margaret's patient guidance, she learned how to knead dough, adjust the oven temperature, and even decorate beautiful little cakes. Every time a batch of cakes comes out of the oven, her heart feels an indescribable joy, a feeling she has never had before. However, even though Margaret was willing to protect her, even though the bakery provided a small corner of peace, the world out there was still harsh to her. The surrounding community did not easily accept a pregnant girl living in a bakery. Judging eyes and whispers continued to surround her. There were customers who walked into the bakery, looked at her with contemptuous eyes, then turned and walked away without even ordering. There were former employees in the shop who, although they didn't say it, clearly tried to keep their distance, as if she carried something unclean and shameful. But that wasn't as scary as what was waiting for her outside the bakery door. In this neighborhood, no one knows Carlos and his group of teenagers. They are not murderers or violent robbers, but they are the haunt of the weak in the neighborhood, those who cannot resist, those who have no one to protect them. And Sophia, with all her misfortunes, obviously became one of their targets. It all started with idle threats. One evening, as Sophia left the bakery to buy some ingredients, she heard a whistle behind her. She turned around and saw Carlos standing there, leaning against the old wall of the small alley, a sarcastic smile clearly on his face. "Homeless girl, now she can be a baker," he smirked, stepping closer. "Do you think that just hiding in a bakery can change your life?" Sophia did not reply. She didn't want to get involved with him, but Carlos wouldn't let her go that easily. "I heard you have a baby in your belly." His voice became smaller, but it made her feel even more scared. "Do you think you can be a mother? Someone like you?" His group of friends stood behind, laughing softly. Something tightened inside her, but she didn't let her fear show. She bowed her head, trying to walk faster, but Carlos reached out and grabbed her wrist. "We can help you," he whispered, his breath fanning across her face. "A girl like you, living a life like this? How can you raise a child? You can think about making money in an easier way." She jerked her hand away, took a few steps back, her eyes filled with indignation. "Are not?" Carlos laughed, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. "Then remember this, Sophia, you will not have a peaceful life. We will always be here." From that day on, things got worse. Sophia cannot go out alone without being followed by Carlos's group. They don't do anything outrageous, but they always appear. On street corners, across the street, even right in front of the bakery. Sometimes, it's just a stare, a sarcastic smile, but it's enough to make her feel like she's being tightened by an invisible string around her neck. Not only Carlos and the group of teenagers, even the children in the boarding house began to mock her every time she passed by. "Children's mother! Surely the baby in your belly belongs to some guy on the street. Does she think she can become a normal person?" Those words rang out every day, like knives cutting deep into her heart. She couldn't resist. She couldn't do anything but keep walking, keep suffering. But one day, society's cruelty doesn't stop at just words. Sophia woke up early one morning, like every day, preparing to open the bakery. But when she stepped inside, the sight before her left her dumbfounded. The store was destroyed. The cake shelves were pushed down, flour scattered everywhere. The cash drawer was pried open and the money disappeared without a trace. The glass door shattered, sharp pieces of glass scattered on the floor. The cold morning air poured in from the broken door, bringing with it a creepy, gloomy feeling. Margaret walked in right behind her hands shaking as she saw the chaotic scene before her eyes. "No," she almost whispered, her eyes painful. "Who did this?" Sophia knows the answer. Carlos. She had no proof, but she knew it was him. This is a warning, his way of showing her that no matter how hard she tries, she cannot escape the estrangement of this world. Margaret sighed, then turned to look at her eyes full of fatigue but still warm. "You don't need to be afraid," she said. "We will fix everything. We will not let them win." Sophia looked at her, and for the first time in many days, tears fell from her eyes. Not out of fear, not out of anger, but out of something even stronger, hope. No matter how cruel society is, no matter how many times people like Carlos try to drown her, she will not break, because there are still people like Margaret, and you will continue to fight. The cold wind swept through each street, carrying away moisture from the wet road surface after last night's rain. The sky was still gray and heavy, as if signaling something bad. Inside the small bakery, the warmth radiating from the oven was not enough to dispel the cold feeling in Sophia's heart. She was standing next to the dough counter, her hands quickly kneading soft, smooth dough, but her mind was blank. She couldn't explain the uneasy feeling creeping in her chest, as if something was about to change forever. The bakery door suddenly opened. A strong wind rushed in, bringing with it the earthy smell of old rain. Margaret was standing near the cashier, checking out a customer, when she stopped. Her eyes turned towards the woman who had just entered. That figure is skinny, but still maintains pride in every step. A long coat covered her small body. Her brown hair was gray. Her deep eyes contained too many things that could not be put into words. Sophia didn't need to look closely to know who it was. Her mother, Isabella. The dizziness came so quickly that she felt like the entire space around her suddenly blurred. She stood still, her hand unconsciously squeezing the dough in her hand until her fingers turned white. How many years has it been? 13 years. A period of time long enough for all wounds to heal, but also deep enough for the scars to never fade. Margaret gently touched Sophia's arm, as a way to remind her that she was not alone. But Sophia couldn't move. Her whole body seemed frozen. "Sophia." That voice rang out softly, trembling, as if the speaker himself wasn't sure if he had the right to say that name anymore. Anger welled up in her chest. Why did she appear now? Why did it take until now, when she had tried to get up, when she had gotten used to not having a family waiting, for her to come here? "What are you doing here?" Sophia's voice was cold, lacking any weakness. Isabella bit her lip, her eyes filled with hesitation. "Mom, I've been looking for you for a long time." "Really?" Sophia smiled faintly, a bitter smile. 13 years. If you really wanted to find it, you could have done it sooner." The atmosphere in the bakery became stuffy. Margaret sighed softly, reached out to hold Sophia's hand, but she just quietly backed away. "I know I was wrong." Isabella spoke up, her voice filled with desperation. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but please listen to me." Sophia didn't know if she had the strength to listen. Old memories returned like a fierce flood, dragging her down into the most painful days of her life. She remembers the day the house door closed before her eyes, remembers the bone-chilling cold as she walked in the rain, remembers every strange look, every despair when no one reached out to help. And it all started with the woman standing in front of her right now. "I don't need to hear it," Sophia said coldly. "Nothing can change what happened." Isabella bowed her head, clasping her trembling hands together. "I don't want to make excuses, but I was wrong. I was so angry, so confused, so scared. When I found out you were pregnant, I couldn't accept it. I think you have tarnished the family's honor. I think the child in your womb is an irreversible mistake. And instead of protecting you, I pushed you out into this world where you have no one to rely on. Her voice cracked. I lost you, and the day we realized that was also the day we realized we had lost everything. Sophia clenched her hands so tightly that her nails were almost digging into her palms. She didn't want to cry. Don't want to let yourself be swayed by these late words. But something in her chest felt like it was starting to crack. I was hoping you would come find me, she whispered, her voice filled with hurt. I used to stand in front of my house, hoping Mom would open the door, hoping she would run out and hug me and say it was all just a nightmare. But that didn't happen. Tears flowed from the corners of Isabella's eyes. She raised her hand, as if wanting to touch her, but hesitated, as if afraid that even the slightest gesture would break her. I can't change the past, she choked. But if possible, I will do everything to make up for my mistakes. She looked at her for a long time. The woman in front of her was no longer the cold and proud mother she once knew. She looked smaller, weaker, as if she had carried this pain with her for the past 13 years. But can her pain be compared to hers? Nothing can make up for what you've been through, Sophia said, her voice calm but firm. But I don't want to hold on to this hatred forever. Isabella looked up, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. I don't know if I can forgive or not, but I want to try. A tear rolled down Isabella's cheek. But this time, it wasn't just tears of regret, but also of hope. Margaret, who had witnessed it all, smiled slightly. Forgiveness is not forgetting, she said softly. It is a choice to not let the past constrain your future. Sophia didn't know if she could forget, but she knew that she didn't want to let this pain define her life anymore. She took a step forward, looking straight into Isabella's eyes. If you really want to make things right, then start today. Isabella didn't need to hear anymore. She nodded, raised her hand to cover her mouth, trying to stop her sobs. And for the first time after 13 years, mother and daughter stood side by side again, no longer two strangers, but two people learning to find each other again, amidst wounds that had not yet healed, but were no longer as painful as before. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come from forgetting, but from accepting that the past cannot be changed, but the future can. Darkness covered the small room, leaving only the weak light from the street lamp shining through the old window. Sophia sat crouched on the narrow bed, her back against the cold wall, her eyes wide open, looking up at the ceiling but not really looking at anything. The space was so quiet that she could hear her heartbeat beating slowly and could feel each gentle stream of air creeping through the door. She used to think that when her mother returned, when she said the words of apology she longed to hear, she would feel relieved. She used to think that if one day her mother truly regretted it, if one day she admitted her mistake, she would be able to forgive and could once again find some of the family love that she had lost a long time ago. But why aren't things that simple? Her mother cried. Her eyes were full of pain and regret. Her hands were shaking, as if she just waved her hand and she would immediately disappear like the wind. But she couldn't immediately hug her, couldn't immediately erase all the hurt that was engraved in her heart. Her mother kicked her out of the house. Her mother left her in the rain without a moment's hesitation. Her mother did not protect her. Those memories are still there, cannot easily disappear with just a few tears and a few apologies. But if she keeps holding on to that resentment, if she keeps living in the darkness of the past, can she really move on? She clenched her hands tightly, her nails digging into her palms to the point of pain. In her head, the questions kept repeating over and over, like a vicious circle with no way out. To forgive or not to forgive? Move on or stay in the past? She doesn't know. She really doesn't know. Her mother wasn't the only person she had to deal with. Because besides the pain from her family, there was another pain that was bigger, deeper, and couldn't be expressed without making her whole body tremble. The baby's father, the neighbor she once trusted, the man who took advantage of her innocence, pushed her into a nightmare from which she could never escape. He still lives a normal life. He still appeared on the streets she passed, still looking at her with eyes as if nothing had happened, as if he had not committed any horrifying crime. He has never regretted it. He never said a word of apology. So why should she forgive? Why should she try to let go of those hurts when he is still living without punishment? But if she doesn't forgive, if she keeps the fire of hatred in her heart, where will she go? Can she live without being bound by this past? The baby in her womb is not at fault. That small creature should not be seen as a reminder of tragedy, should not be hated by her just because the person who created it was a despicable person. She knows that she cannot change the past, but she can change the future. She can choose to live without being controlled by her trauma. But how to do that? The following nights, Sophia could hardly sleep. She just lay there, her eyes open, staring into the dark space before her. She no longer cried because her tears had dried up a long time ago. But she still felt pain, still felt lost, as if the whole world was her alone. She was alone, fighting all the hurt that no one could understand. There are times when she wants to disappear. There were times when she felt like she couldn't go on anymore. But then, every morning, she still wakes up, still works in the bakery, still continues to live, even though inside, she is crumbling little by little. Margaret never forced her to say what she was thinking, but she was always there, quietly observing her, quietly giving her the warmth she had never received from anyone else. One evening, as she sat in front of the fireplace, the firelight dancing on the opposite wall, Margaret suddenly spoke. "Sophia, do you know?" Her voice was warm, gentle, but also very determined. "Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean denying what happened. Forgiveness is simply a way for you to no longer be controlled by the past." Sophia did not answer, just listened silently. "There are wounds that will never go away, but you can choose not to let them define you." Margaret turned to look at her, her eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to forgive right away, but you need to find a way to let go. Not for anyone else, but for yourself." Sophia felt a lump in her throat. Let go. She never thought about that. She only knows hate, only knows pain. But she never thought about letting go. Can she do it? That night, Sophia lay down and thought for a long time. She thought about her mother, about the past, about everything that had happened. She remembered the days when she was a child, when her mother still loved her, when her family was not yet covered by darkness. She remembered the times her mother held her in her arms and sang gentle lullabies to her. Her mother used to love her, but her mother also abandoned her. Can she forgive? Can she put aside everything that has happened and call her mother once again? As for him, the one who destroyed her, the one who turned her childhood into a series of nightmares, she cannot forgive him. But can she stop letting him haunt her life? She didn't want him to have control over her mind anymore. She didn't want to feel fear take over her entire body every time she thought of him. Perhaps forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Perhaps forgiveness is not about letting the person who hurt you be at peace. It's to let yourself be at peace. She couldn't let the pain control her forever. She cannot let her past determine her future. And so she will let go. Not because of Mom, not because of him, but because of herself. When the first sunlight filtered through the small window in the cramped room behind the bakery, Sophia opened her eyes. She had a deeper sleep than the previous nights, no longer suffocated by the shadow of the past. She sat up, her hand out of habit placed on her stomach, feeling the weak heartbeat of the child she was carrying inside her. In that moment, she knew that she was not just living for herself anymore. She was living for a small creature who had never had the opportunity to choose her fate. She cannot forever let the darkness weigh on her mind. She cannot forever let fear control her life. She must change. Margaret told her that forgiveness does not mean accepting or ignoring the bad things that happened, but is a way for herself to be free from the shackles of the past. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. She cannot forget what he did. He, the miserable neighbor she once trusted. He destroyed her childhood, turned her into a silent victim, and pushed her into a life full of pain and humiliation. But he still lived leisurely, continuing to act as if nothing had ever happened. That is unacceptable. Sophia knows that to truly step out of the darkness, she must regain justice for herself. She couldn't continue to hide, continue to be silent like the previous days. It's time for her to stand up, not only to protect herself, but also to protect the child she is carrying in her belly. She couldn't let one day her children have to face people like him, monsters in human form. Decisions are never easy. Even as she prepared herself, as she reminded herself that this was the right thing to do, Fear clung to her like an invisible shadow. But this time she is not alone. She has Margaret. She has Isabella, her mother who once abandoned her, but is now trying to correct her mistake. She has her baby, the only reason why she has the strength to move on. Isabella cried a lot when she heard her daughter decide to denounce that miserable neighbor. She hugged her. Her trembling hands clasped her child's thin shoulders. "I should have protected you," she sobbed. "I was wrong, but this time, I won't leave you alone anymore." Sophia looked deeply into her mother's eyes, full of regret. For the first time in many years, she saw sincerity without any lies. She nodded and said nothing more, but in her heart she felt something like relief. The next day, Sophia and Isabella went to the police station together. Just entering that place made her feet feel heavy, because it meant she had to once again dig up the most painful memories of her life. But she knew that she had no way back. The police officer who received the case looked at her with understanding eyes. They had encountered many cases like hers, young girls who were hurt but too afraid to speak out, who were pushed to the edge of despair before finding the courage to fight back. "What is his name?" Sophia swallowed, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "He's my old neighbor," she said, her fists clenched. "He took advantage of me." The police officer nodded and began taking notes. "Do you have any proof?" Sophia clenched her hands. "This is what makes things so difficult." He left no trace. He is the type of person who is cunning enough to know how to hide his crimes. But this time he made a mistake. He thought that Sophia would stay silent forever. He didn't expect that one day she would stand up. The police officer listened to her story, every detail, every pain told. Sophia felt as if she was peeling back layers of her own skin, revealing all the wounds that had never healed. She is no longer the hurt girl of the past, no longer the resigned victim. She was a mother, and she would not let her child grow up in a world where people like him could live with impunity. The investigation begins. He was called in for questioning. He denied everything, still maintaining his false face as always. But this time, he couldn't escape, because Sophia wasn't the only victim. Other girls in the neighborhood who were scared, who thought they would never be able to speak out, also began to stand up. When they learned that Sophia had dared to denounce, they also went to the police station and told what they had endured. He has no way out. He was arrested. The day he was led away in handcuffs, Sophia stood there, looking at him one last time. He turned to look at her, his eyes filled with anger and surprise. He didn't expect that a small girl like her, a child he thought he could trample under his feet, could do this, but she did it. He no longer has control over her life. He will pay the price for what he did. Justice cannot erase the wounds in her heart. It couldn't make her forget the hellish days she had to go through, but it brought her something more important: liberation. For the first time in a long time, Sophia felt like she could actually breathe. Margaret hugged her as they returned to the bakery, her hand gently caressing her back like a true mother. Isabella stood next to her, her eyes red but shining with determination. All three of those women, despite carrying different traumas, have now come out of the darkness together, building a new future together. Sophia placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby's heartbeat. Her child will not have to grow up in fear. Her child will know that his mother fought to bring about a more just world. And you, Sophia, are no longer a victim. She is a warrior, and this is just the beginning. I will develop content according to your request with a length of 4,000 words, ensuring continuity, strong emotions, and no separation of ideas. Darkness still surrounds Sophia's life, even though she has come out of her wandering days, even though she has found a place to live, work, and start a new life. But the wounds in her heart have not yet healed. The past is still like an invisible monster, always waiting to engulf her in pain and hatred. She tried to learn how to let go, learn how to not let the hurt determine her future. But there are some things that just cannot go away. Just letting go. There are people who deserve to be punished. There are truths that need to be told. There are wounds that cannot heal until justice is served. She had been silent long enough, had run away long enough. Now is the time for her to face her past, face the person who destroyed her, face what society has always deliberately ignored. She used to think that if she just kept quiet, if she just kept living, everything would pass. But no, The pain doesn't go away on its own. People like him won't stop. He hurt her, and if she didn't speak up, other girls would have to suffer like she did. She couldn't let that happen. She cannot let him continue to live peacefully, as if he had never done anything wrong. He must pay the price. But how? What can a child like her do? A homeless girl with no one behind her to protect her? No money, no power. Can she fight him? Can she make the world listen to her? She spent many nights thinking about it, wondering, afraid. But then she realized one thing. If she didn't do it, no one would. Margaret was the first person she spoke to. She listened to her calmly, without interrupting, without showing pity or shock, to the point of being unable to say anything. When she finished, Margaret was silent for a long moment, then gently placed her hand on her trembling hand. "You don't have to do this on your own," she said. Those words were like a ray of light penetrating the darkness in her heart. She is used to facing everything alone, but this time she is no longer alone. Margaret helped her find women's protection organizations who could help her bring the case to light. They listened to her, collected the evidence she had, and guided her on how to bring this truth before the law. The process was not easy. She had to face her own fears, had to recall everything she wanted to forget. There were times when she wanted to give up, times when she felt like she was running into an impenetrable wall. But each time, Margaret reminded her that she wasn't doing this just for herself. She did this for the other girls, for justice, for the truth. That day, when she stood before the court, when she saw him sitting there, still with a defiant look in his eyes, as if he was not afraid at all, she knew that she was right to bring everything to light. He didn't think she could do this. He thought that she would forever be silent, would forever live in fear, but he was wrong. She looked straight into his eyes, no longer afraid. And when the verdict was announced, when he was found guilty, when he was taken away, she felt like she had just lifted a burden that had been weighing on her shoulders for so many years. He has been punished. She regained justice for herself, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. Life may be cruel, may be full of injustice, but that doesn't mean we have to silently accept it. There are pains that need to be told. There are truths that need to be brought to light. No one can change the past, but we can decide how we face it. Sophia was once a victim, but she refused to let herself be defined by that pain forever. She stood up, fought, and demanded justice for herself. And that is the lesson we need to remember. No one has the right to take away our voice. Family is not always perfect. There are mothers who have made mistakes, and there are fathers who have turned their backs on their children. But family is more than just people who share blood. Family is the people who love us, the people who are willing to stand by our side even if the whole world turns their back. Margaret was not Sophia's biological mother, but she gave her love, protection, and most importantly, she gave her faith in the goodness of people. There are wounds that can take a long time to heal. There are mistakes that cannot be corrected immediately. But if there is love, if there is sincerity, there is always hope. This society has hidden corners. There are victims who are not protected. There are evil people who still live freely while those who are hurt have to stay silent. But that doesn't mean justice doesn't exist. That doesn't mean we can't change. Every voice, every action, no matter how small, can make a difference. If someone is suffering, speak up. If someone needs help, extend your hand. We cannot eliminate all the injustice in this world, but together we can create change. If Sophia's story has touched your heart, if you believe that no one should be silent in the face of injustice, please like and subscribe to the channel to continue watching emotional and meaningful stories. Sophia's journey is not over, and there are still so many more stories to be told, so many truths to come to light. Let's spread the message of courage, justice, and humanity together. What do you think about Sophia's decision? Do you think she should forgive and move on? Or do you think she did the right thing in facing her past and getting justice? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you have experienced similar trauma, if you are looking for support, don't hesitate to speak up. You are not alone. Let's create a community where everyone can find sympathy and sharing. Remember, No one can take away your voice. You are stronger than you think, and your story deserves to be heard.